Look, let's cut to the chase. I'm a gamer, and you're probably also a gamer. And us gamers have a rich and extensive history going back generations. And within this generational history is a lot of what ifs, mainly revolving around consoles that never came out or potential collaborations between multiple different companies. And today, we're going to be covering these consoles on the canceled video game consoles Iceberg. With many of these consoles being, if they came out, they could have changed the entire landscape to some just being prototypes. So, without a further ado, let's get into the Iceberg. And to start off our Iceberg, we have the early Xbox prototypes. And many people don't know this, but the earliest design of the OG Xbox was a giant X. The X-shaped console was revealed at GDC 2000 and had the bizarre appearance that caught everyone's eye. With its strange shape and shiny case was milled from solid blocks of aluminum with a green light in the front center of the X that turned on when the system was on, and it had ports and disk drives located in the back of the system. And this design wasn't meant to be the final design, more of a concept for designers to build upon and change as they saw fit. The Big X was extremely expensive as a prototype, costing $18,000 to make, mainly due to it being made out of just solid aluminum. And Microsoft flexed hard because several of these prototypes were made, showing the world that they were not afraid to spend a pretty penny when jumping into the console game. I kind of like this design too. It reminds me of those consoles you'd see in like Johnny Test or like some other cartoon or something. Of course, eventually Microsoft would tinker the design and land on the version of the OG Xbox we're all familiar with today. Although, I wish they released a version that looked like this, or maybe a future console that looked like this. I love the look. It's just corny. I love it. I'd love to have this in like a corner of my room somewhere. And there were two systems known as the Alpha Towers, Alpha Tower 1 and 2, but those were dev kits, which aren't really that worth covering because they're pretty much just, think like the internals of an Xbox put into a PC tower, and that's it. Like, all of these companies do that for prototypes, so. The Multisystem MSC 2000 Master System is a controller released under Multisystem China. The steering wheel style controller with pedals did come out for computers, but its story isn't as simple as that. Multisystem China purchased the rights of the design for the controller from a failed prototype known as the Konix Master System, but more on that later. According to John Linnerman on an episode of Digital Foundry's Direct Weekly podcast, Nintendo actually did have plans for a Switch Pro. The system would be a mid-gen upgrade of the Switch with better hardware and hopefully better battery life too, most likely being able to support more demanding games. Think of it kind of like the new 3DS, where it had like exclusive titles that were too powerful for like the standard model, but they could still play other 3DS games and all that. It wasn't like a new system. Litterman cites Nintendo's poor track record when it comes to transitioning as a reason why they scrapped the idea of a mid-generation upgrade to focus on the Switch's successor. And this kind of follows the pattern of GameCube being a flop, but the Wii being a success, and the Wii U flopping tremendously, but the Switch was a success. So, taking this in mind, along with the technical shortcomings of the Switch, it looks like Nintendo really is locking in with their next system. Or at least I hope so, because Nintendo needs some better tech, man. Like, the games are pretty good on the Switch, but the Switch can hardly even handle Scarlet and Violet, so it's really showing its age at this point. The 3DO M2, also known as the Panasonic M2, is a cancelled revision of the 3DO console. Originally, the M2 was planned to be an add-on of the 3DO, but they then decided to commit it to being a standalone console under Panasonic. Multiple companies invested tons into the system, with prototypes being made along with presentations of the system in 1995, and it having several games in development, including titles from Capcom and Konami. Project would be cancelled due to a lack of confidence that the M2 would be able to compete with Nintendo and Sony. However, parts of the M2 would be used in Konami arcade cabinets and kiosks, mainly to recoup losses. It would have been really interesting to see if the system actually came out and been successful. Perhaps one or two exclusives could have turned it into a cult classic system, and maybe Panasonic could have been a big player in the console scene today. Also, going forward, you're going to notice a really common trend of either companies not being confident that a system would perform well, or just not enough money and overambition. So going forward, you're going to see a lot of that. The Atari Jaguar Duo, also known as the Jaguar Free, or simply the Jag Duo, is a failed prototype variant of the Jaguar. The Jag Duo is a Jaguar with a CD add-on being integrated into the system. This would allow a new buyer to skip out on buying the add-on if they wanted to play any of the Jaguar's whopping 11 CD games. The Jag Duo was unveiled in the winter of 1995, but would never see production, being cancelled not long before Jaguar be discontinued in 1996, when Atari would close their doors. Now, if you have any context on this entry, comment it down below, because I don't really get it. Because Sony does sell official black variants of the PS5, and I don't really see how rare a decal would count as, or how it would count as a canceled console. But as consolation, I did find this beauty of a system on some English dude's channel, so bask in its glory. And starting tier 2 of the Iceberg, we have the AT&T 3DO. In 1994, AT&T, that's right, the phone company, would enter the console scene with their own 3DO model, or at least attempt to. Now, the 3DO might be confusing, as multiple companies have attempted to release their own 3DOs, with others actually doing so. Basically, 3DO lacks the resources to manufacture consoles, so instead, they license their hardware to other companies to make the systems for them. And one of the companies that created and presented a prototype was AT&T, displaying it at the 1994 Consumer Electronics Show. Samsung and Toshiba would also have 3DO models that they presented at the same show, but none of these systems would see the light of day, as the 3DO was way more expensive than other consoles on the market, coming out to a whopping cost of $699, with only Gold Star, Sanyo, Panasonic, and FZ1 ever producing and selling 3DO systems to gaming enthusiasts at the time. Still, imagine AT&T putting out consoles. Maybe they could have jumped on mobile gaming early or something. Maybe they could have had the first Switch. Gaming is full of what-ifs like this, and this Iceberg is loaded with them. It's really fun to think about, like, what the scene would be like if a lot of these companies committed to these consoles. The Ultravision Video Arcade System was a sort of all-in-one system from a company known as Ultravision from the early 80s. The system was advertised as a computer, an arcade cabinet, and a color TV all in one package, with a 10-inch color CRT screen, a built-in game console, and a computer, 2 controllers, and cartridge ports for Atari 2600 and ColecoVision games, along with its own set of cartridges. This is like the coolest one on the Iceberg, in my opinion. I really would want one of these in the corner of my room. And that's not all, because this system was technically portable, as its battery could run off of AC and DC power, meaning you could hook it up to your car if you really wanted to. This thing was an absolute beast of a machine, and would not only have been the first multimedia devices, but monster of a system, and it was not cheap by any means. The VAS priced at a listed $595, which in 1983 would have been around $1,800 today, which doesn't seem bad for how much you actually get out of this thing. Like, imagine like a flat screen, imagine like a Roku. It's like 4K and all of that. And you got like a PS5 built into it, and you also have like a really strong system. Like, that's pretty much what you're getting. The VAS would never see production, however, as Ultravision seemingly never had the money or resources to actually make this thing. So it just kind of ended off as that. Now, I don't really understand what this entry means either. Nintendo has officially announced that a successor to the Nintendo Switch would be announced when they are ready to do so, and we still don't know what it's going to be and where in September of 2024, so Nintendo Switch 2 2023 didn't really make sense. I know that there were NVIDIA leaks that supposedly leaked the specs of a Nintendo prototype console. That might be what this is referencing. If anyone has an idea, go ahead and comment it down below. More on that thing I mentioned earlier, the Konix Multisystem was a super ambitious device from Konix, a company known for their joysticks. The system was originally going to be an interchangeable joystick, where you could swap between a steering wheel or a flight stick, but the team decided to overhaul it from a pretty advanced controller to a full-on beast of a system. The multi-system would have been an absolute marvel of technology and collaboration, with several companies investing resources into the system's development. The multi-system was intended to be on par with 16-bit home computers of the time at half the price, costing around $200 in '89. That would have been around $666 today. Spooky. Konix promised that the multi-system would release in 1989 with plenty of games. However, delays and a lack of funding caused the project to be scrapped. Flare Technology, who worked on the project, would go on to be acquired by Atari to create the Atari Jaguar. Belfruit would utilize the tech from the multi-system to be used in quiz machines, and as you already know, the design would be bought by MSC and used for their own controller. Also, to show how cool this thing was meant to look, here's a chair add-on that you can use to make your own simulation pod. Like, this was really cool looking. After the 3DO and the failed attempt at the M2, Panasonic would take some time away from the console scene until October of 2010, when they would attempt to cause quite the stir in the handheld scene. You see, the Jungle would have had to compete with handheld titans such as the 3DS and the PS Vita, but Panasonic had a trick up their sleeve with the Jungle. The Jungle was closer in appearance to a mini laptop than a DS, equipped with a central trackpad and a keyboard, and seemingly it would have been more like a portable computer with an OLED screen, Linux-based operating system, and would have had a focus on playing MMOs on the go, with RuneScape being a launch title. Unfortunately, Panasonic would cancel their plans to go forward with the Jungle in 2011 due to changes in the market, which is unfortunate as I would have loved to have something like this. Like, I have the Steam Deck and it's probably one of the coolest gaming things I've ever had. I can't get enough of the thing. But at the same time, as a kid at the time, I would have never taken this over the 3DS, bro. This joint don't have Pokemon on it. This joint don't have Black 2, White 2, Black or White, Heart Gold, Soul Silver, or Platinum, so I'm just not picking it, bro. The Bandai HET was a prototype portable system created by Bandai in collaboration with Nintendo. The system was a strange yet fascinating mix between a laptop and an SNES, with a small screen next to a cartridge port and seemingly a portable battery. The HET was shown in 1993 at E3 and was seemingly never seen again, as I could find very little information on this thing despite it being such an interesting piece of tech from the era when, right before Nintendo would be terrified of collaborating with other companies. The more I looked it up, the Zelda CDI joint came out later that year, so they probably canceled this as a knee-jerk reaction to that failure, and more on Nintendo getting betrayed by companies later, because it's kind of insane. The Action Gamemaster was a canceled handheld developed by Active Enterprises, which is the company known for creating the infamous Action 52. And like Action 52, the Gamemaster promised a lot of games, seemingly being able to play NES, SNES, and Sega Genesis games, along with a CD add-on in development for the future. Oh, and did I mention this thing was a handheld? It wasn't pocket-sized though, this thing was bulky as all hell, with a 3.2-inch LCD screen. The Gamemaster was supposed to release alongside some new bangers from Active Enterprises, including an SNES port of Action 52, Cheetah Man 3, and another combo game called Sports 5. The handheld was planned to release in 1994, but would never be released as Active Enterprises would go belly up before the system could begin production. The Red Jade was a handheld system made by Ericsson and developed by a company of the same name, Red Jade, with the intention to compete with the Game Boy Advance. Before starting as a solo venture, Red Jade proposed the handheld to Sony and Sega, with both turning them down, leading to them to work on it themselves. And despite looking like one of those leapfrog kiddie systems, this handheld had some power to it, boasting Bluetooth technology, phone compatibility, GPS, an MP3 player, and PS1 level graphics. And this thing was going to come out in February of 2000 for $150. Ericsson would cancel the system before development, along with 22,000 layoffs due to poor sales and other ventures. Ericsson's mobile department would be absorbed into Sony, becoming Sony Ericsson, and then eventually later Sony Mobile Communications, and the Red Jade would come back as a game studio. The Nintendo PlayStation was a project that proposes one of the largest what-ifs in all of gaming. In 1988, Sony would develop 2 prototypes for Nintendo, with the most significant one being a hybrid console that would play SNES games along with CDs, which was known as the Nintendo PlayStation. And everything seemed to be fine between the two companies, until it was found out that Sony planned to undercut Nintendo, taking most of the profits and demanding licensed rights to all CD games on the system, effectively just draining Nintendo's pockets and gaining nothing from the venture. Sony would make an announcement that the system would be developed in June of 1991 at that year's Consumer Electronics Show. However, Nintendo would humiliate them by announcing the next day that they would not be going forward with Sony, but instead with their worst enemy, Philips. Yeah, not Microsoft, Philips. This would lead to the CDI Mario and Zelda games ultimately being a complete humiliation for Nintendo that caused them to rarely, if ever, work with any companies, even to the very day. And of course, Sony would go on to release the PS1, leading to the two being 2 massive titans in the gaming industry. But everyone loves to wonder what the scene would be like if this joint venture was a success. Like, the PS5 has no games, but is a strong system. And the Switch has lots of games, but is a weak system. So perhaps in a bizarro universe, this could have been a damn fucking titan of a relationship. Like, imagine like a Steam Deck with Sony and Nintendo games on it, bro. That'd be insane. The Sega Pluto was an unreleased version of the Sega Saturn, and the prototype was large and heftier than the Saturn, mainly due to the onboard modem, adding quite a bit of heft to the system, making it a bit of a chunky boy. This made it one of the earliest consoles to have internet support right out of the box. Alas, Sega decided to move on to the Dreamcast and would ultimately leave the Pluto behind. The XGP, short for Extreme Game Player, was a planned handheld created by GamePark that would have had to compete with the DS. The XGP was meant to be a successor of their GP32 handheld, which released in Korean and parts of the European scene, being released in 2001 to decent success. The XGP was announced in March of 2006 and would release with free versions: the standard XGP, the XGP Mini, and the XGP Kids. Like other systems on the Iceberg, GamePark would go belly up before the system could ever see the light of day. But the team would begin a splinter company known as GamePark Holdings, which would release their GP2X, giving the GP32 a successor. Good to see a team's effort not go to complete waste like in the other entries. The Magnavox Odyssey was the first ever home game console, and it was primitive to say the least, but that's not what we're here for. The Odyssey 3 was planned to improve everything of the Odyssey 2 did, with better graphics, colors, and audio output. The Odyssey 3 would have come out with a keyboard and have reverse compatibility with Odyssey 2 games, with expansion modules that would allow add-ons for the system in the future. Ultimately, though, Philips, who owns Magnavox, would cancel the console due to Atari and Coleco far surpassing them, with the Odyssey 3 being weaker than their more popular competition. The Xbox Watch is a bizarre planned device that stemmed from that weird era of the early Xbox One's release where they focused on like everything except for gaming. The watch was worked on in 2013 and was developed by the Kinect team, which pretty much served as an Xbox-themed fitness tracker. The watch had a heartbeat tracker, GPS, and an Xbox One style UI, but the watch was scrapped because it just did not need to be a thing. This was when, there was a lot of protest against the Kinect's forced inclusion into the Xbox One, along with other focuses that Xbox invested into that had nothing to do with gaming, or them just trying to be the Wii in 2013. Down to tier 4 of the Iceberg, we have the limited edition Halo Xbox. And this entry isn't really a canceled console, but is instead a super rare OG Xbox. The Halo Special Edition Xboxes were prototype Xboxes with translucent orange casing with Halo Special Edition plastered onto it. These prototypes were said to have been made to test case covers for collaborations and special editions in the future. And these Xboxes are super rare, with only 5 being known of. Again, not a canceled console, but still a super rare prototype. Now, at first I thought this was a stealthily placed SAO reference, but instead the Nurve Nanogear was a canceled handheld system developed by a company called Nurve. The Nanogear was a controller-shaped handheld intended to be released in 2003 that had 2 large selling points. The Nanogear was far more powerful than GBA, with online built-in and the ability to create games for the system, appealing to ambitious solo developers and gamers alike, who could play these games from around the world by downloading them from the internet. This system could have shook things up a lot. Alas, it would never release due to its over-ambitiousness. The Atari Game Brain was an unreleased console developed by Atari. The Game Brain was sort of a 10-in-1 system that played a bunch of games from dedicated systems like Pong alongside buttons and paddles on the device. The Game Brain wasn't meant to be some brand system or anything, it was just a way for Atari to use a bunch of their excess CPUs that were lying around. The system was meant to release in June of 1978, however, consoles that were dedicated to one game kind of became irrelevant, making way for consoles that played multiple games through cartridges. And around this time, the Atari 2600 was already out, so the Game Brain was ultimately scrapped. The Super System was a canceled system developed by Namco that sought to compete with Nintendo and Sega. Namco, who prior had a key role in developing many of the earliest titles and ports, would have had a fallout with Nintendo over developing guidelines. Namco would then go on to develop games for TurboGrafx 16 until deciding to take their own crack at a console. The Namco Super System would utilize Namco's own arcade hardware along with their talented game developers to create a system with a scheduled release of 1989. However, Namco would scrap their plans not due to a lack of funding or overambition, but just out of fear that they couldn't make it in the cutthroat market of the late 80s, with the SNES and Genesis being head and shoulders above numerous competitors. Namco would still go on to compete with Nintendo, though, releasing games for the PS1 coming off of Sony's spat with Nintendo. A classic case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. The Atari Panther was a planned successor to the Atari 7800. The Panther was developed in collaboration with Flare Technologies after the Konix Master System was abandoned. The Panther had sort of a printer look to it, boasting being a 32-bit powerhouse, but the Panther would ultimately be scrapped to make way for the Atari Jaguar. The Sega Neptune was a planned 2-in-1 system that combined the Genesis and the 32X. This way, someone getting into the gaming scene wouldn't have to buy a 32X add-on along with a Genesis, and I think this is pretty cool. I personally like the design of the Neptune. It had a way more slick design than the toilet look of the 32X on top of the Genesis. The Neptune is the code name, but it most likely would have been called the Genesis 32X in the West, although Neptune is less confusing and cooler sounding. The idea was ultimately scrapped due to the Sega Saturn being released close to the Neptune's planned release date, so it never came to be. Down to tier 5 of the iceberg, we have the Sega VR. The Sega VR was an early planned venture into VR gaming all the way back in the 90s, and although you might think of this as kind of like a Virtual Boy competitor, this headset was super advanced for its time, featuring full-color LCD internal display and even motion tracking. The Sega VR was planned for use in arcades and for home releases, and the technology for it would be used in arcades, but it would never come out on consoles. The Sega VR would be used with the Genesis and would later have a Sega Saturn variant planned for a release of 1994, with games even being developed for it. But ultimately, it would be scrapped by Sega, citing safety concerns due to it causing motion sickness, and apparently the graphics were too good and too realistic. Which means, hey, VR stuff can be pretty scary as is, but this has blast processing, dude. Come on. Now, you may be thinking that this is a repeat entry because we already covered the Nintendo PlayStation, but if you remember, I said there were 2 projects that Sony worked on with Nintendo, with the initial project being simply a CD add-on for the SNES, similar to the 32X of Sega. The SNES would have had its own toilet. The addition began to lose interest as Sony became more interested in a hybrid console opposed to just being an add-on, focusing on the Nintendo PlayStation. But as we know, Sony and Nintendo would cut ties, but that add-on be canceled as well, with Nintendo releasing CDI Mario and Zelda games. Bombs? Rope? It's yours, my friend. Now, the Apple iPlay is not a real system. It was an April Fool's joke. But as consolidation, I will talk about Apple's failed system, the Pippin. You see, in the 90s, Two of the most random companies, Apple and Bandai, would team up to make the Apple Bandai Pippin, a multimedia device that advertised itself as a console and computer all in one. The tag team functioned with Apple providing the foundation for the system, which was a watered down Macintosh, and Bandai would manufacture it. Since it was essentially a Macintosh, the Pippin had the hardware advantage, along with it having a version of Macintosh OS on it. But due to this, it was way more expensive than other consoles on the market. For perspective, the Pippin was $600, while the N64 was $200. Its controller was also ugly as hell, bro. Like, you thought the N64 controller was bad? Look at this boomerang thing here, bro. Come on. Due to the pricing and the lack of games on the Pippin, despite Bandai being a big manufacturer for it, it would be discontinued 2 years later, with it being considered one of Apple's biggest flops to date. The Taito WoWoW was a planned system that was being developed by Taito, ASCII, and JSP, which was the owner of the TV network from which the WoW gets its name. The WoW is probably one of the goofiest console names on the list. Like, imagine being a kid in the 90s and your pals are all like talk about like who has the coolest system, and out comes you repping the WoW. That aside, the console was set to port Taito's arcade games on state-of-the-art arcade cabinet quality hardware, along with the ability to download games wirelessly. In the early 90s, this would have been used through the JSB's satellite system, which would have made this a revolutionary system when it came out. Unfortunately, their ambition would be their downfall, as these download times were extremely slow. You gotta remember, this thing was shown off in 92. This, combined with the cost of production, just made the WoW impossible to put out in the cutthroat gaming scene of the 90s. And this one's a repeat entry, sorry. As consolation, here's a picture of a panda without the eye rings. Now, go ahead and pause and think about it for a moment. It's really deep when you start to look at it. I'll give you time. And down in the depths of the iceberg, we have the Atari Cosmos. The Atari Cosmos was a handheld system developed by Atari in the late 70s. The Cosmos was similar to other handhelds of the era with a primitive LED display, but Atari wanted to flex some holographic technology and they just bought the rights for, with holographic images being displayed over the LED screen, giving the games a unique and immersive appearance. And unlike other handhelds at the time, the Cosmos was a cartridge-based system, giving it a massive advantage over the handhelds of the time, which were all dedicated to one game. And this would have been huge for the early 80s, but it wasn't like the Game Boy where it booted up cartridges that had ROMs on them. Instead, it had 9 games baked into the system, and cartridges would just tell the system what game it was playing, so that a certain game's display would pop up when a cartridge was put in. But I mean, this still was kind of impressive for the time, though. The Cosmos would be canceled in 81, probably due to criticisms of the holographic layers, because critics were not impressed with the seemingly immersive experience. If the Dreamcast was such a good console, how come there's no Dreamcast 2? Well, yeah, Sega never officially had plans for a Dreamcast 2, however, there were plans for post-Dreamcast systems. However, there's little, if any, documentation on them, as Sega shifted into being a game creator than putting out consoles. But the love for the Dreamcast has led to many fan projects, speculation, and even a petition to get Sega to put up a console. There's also this wiki that kept popping up that had a bunch of like fake consoles on it. So like a lot of people had like their own ideas of what these systems would have been, and they even come up with like fake games for them. It's really cool. I like it. Some have theorized that the Xbox is a successor to the Dreamcast, mainly due to the controller and console similarities and Microsoft filling that void that Sega left. There's a pretty good video on it by Kynology Gaming, So you should check it out if you're interested. Now, when I first looked at this Iceberg, Xbox 720 was the first thing that caught me. I was like, there's no way. Nah, that's not real. Nah. And from what I found, yeah, no, it's not real. However, a PDF of a leaked document from 4chan posted on Reddit refers to a next-gen Xbox system as the Xbox 720. But trust a PDF from 4chan posted on Reddit claiming that it's a gaming leak to be real, if you will. Also, yeah, disappointingly, there are a couple entries like this on the last tier. It's just that. ControlVision is an attempted console made by Hasbro that had the standout quality of using VHS tapes for games instead of cartridges. The console was worked on in 1985, being made from a ColecoVision with a tape recorder on it. Now you see where it kind of gets its name from. Also, a lot of consoles back then just had Vision in the name. And the ControlVision had 3 games in development, with one of them being an early version of the notorious interactive game Night Trap. Hasbro decided to scrap their plans due to the system being set to come out in 1989 at a price of $299, where it would have been eaten alive by the competition. The PSP 4000 is another one of those 720 type entries where fans anticipated an upgraded variant of the PSP, building off of the 3000 and the Go models. Fans anticipated a camera and improved specs. However, Sony would instead go on to release the PS Vita, with people only wondering if the PS Vita was meant to be the PSP 4000, but we may never know. The Atari Mirai is one of the strangest systems on this Iceberg, if not ever, because with these entries, at least we know what the systems were planned to be, and we even have some technical details. But in the case of the Mirai, we know next to nothing about it. We don't even know the hardware aspects of the system, because all we have is an empty prototype shell discovered in 1996 when Atari shut down. Theories on what it could be stem from Atari's attempt at a Neo Geo system due to the cartridge port, to being a console version of the Atari ST computer, to the console being known as the VCS 9000, a mystery system that was only known from a version of Pole Position that was owned by the late game historian Kurt Vendel. And given it's almost been 30 years since Atari closed their doors, we may never know what the Mirai was going to be, or also what that VCS 9000 thing ever is going to be, going down as two of gaming's biggest mysteries. The Indrema L600 was a planned multimedia console that kind of feels like PC meets console. The L600 ran on Linux-based operating system, with a web browser, DVD player, DVR, and game console all in one package. But on top of that, the PC aspect really sinks in when looking at its replaceable GPU, with them having the intent on releasing upgrade and replacement GPUs that you could swap out independently. The system was shown off in 2000, and just one second. Making a controller that shiny is a massive mistake. Like, you're gonna hand this to a gamer. Like, you get this, right? Like, this joint is going to get grimy and gunky as hell. It's going to be smudged up, bro. Anyway, back on topic. The L600 would be canceled in 2001 due to a lack of funding, and that would be that. And that's going to do it for the Iceberg. Thank you all for watching. This was a really, really, really interesting one to cover. I've always loved looking into games and stuff and gaming history. It's always something cool to look back on, the consoles of old and all of that, the AVGN type beat. But I'd like to thank you again for watching. Oh, don't think I didn't see the massive love that I got from that squid video. You guys are awesome, bro. If you're here from that squid video, hi. I also do Iceberg videos, as you've probably seen. And thank you for that. we hit 2,500 plus subscribers, which it's ridiculous, bro. Holy my goodness. So this isn't the 2.5K special. That will be the next video, and it will be cryptid themed. So if you're here for the cryptid videos, be ready for that. Got more icebergs ready, and more cryptid corners ready, more cryptid videos. I really am gonna enjoy making the next video. It does mean a lot, and the fact that I'm gonna do a video that I kind of been wanting to do ever since I was good, it's gonna be awesome, bro. So, but like, thank you for the support again. I'm not gonna keep you much longer, but thanks for watching. If you liked it, leave a like. If you know any other canceled systems, or even just like gamer facts that you want to put down in the description, go ahead and leave a comment down below. I always love reading your comments. I've been doing nothing but like reading through comments from the new video. But anyways, see you later. Goodbye. And in the next time. Ball.